Freshwater mussels are one of the most protected species in Indiana. They siphon in water and they clean the water. And so in Indiana, it's illegal to move a mussel. That's what I like to tell people, don't move a mussel.
Welcome to In the Parks, an Indiana State Parks podcast. I'm Allison Martin, and I'm excited to tell the stories of these amazing places in the Hoosier State. Our parks show off the best of Indiana, but there's so much more to these parks, and it's time to go in-depth to really know the stories and discover what makes each destination unique and valuable as part of Indiana. On In the Parks, you'll learn about the people, legends, and places that formed Indiana's parks in the past and who is writing the story now. Today, we're going to Prophetstown. Prophetstown State Park is the youngest of the Indiana State Parks family, but at 20 years old, this park is definitely not a kid anymore. After visiting it for the first time, I was kind of obsessed, and I've been thinking about going back ever since I left. The day I visited was one of those perfect July days where the weather is cooperating and the humidity is low. I arrived early in the morning and the sun was still rising over the prairie. As my friend Kate and I pulled into the park, the red barn at the farm at Prophetstown popped against the blue sky, which was dotted with puffy white clouds. The grass was bright green, and everything was glowing and golden. It was like going back in history to the quintessential Indiana farmhouse, untouched by time. The longer we were there, the more I fell in love with the park. You won't find towering views, ravines, or waterfalls, but you'll discover another part of Indiana where prairie grasses, farm animals, migrating birds, and even tiny freshwater mussels capture your heart. Prophetstown tells the story of how our state was impacted by ice, water, fire, and human hands. And that's how we'll spend our time together today, learning how these elements are part of Indiana in the past and the present. Before we talk about what impacted the land, let's make sure we know what land it is. Prophetstown State Park is right off Interstate 65 on the northeast side of Lafayette, sort of West Lafayette battleground area. At around 2,000 acres, the park rests in the confluence of the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers. The park has several trails, including a paved hiking and biking trail. There are shelters and a playground. Plus, there's an incredible aquatic center that we'll get into more later. The campground offers 55 full hookup sites and 55 electric sites. And we'll talk more about that too, because it turns out I have another family connection to the state park, and it has to do with the campground. The park also honors the indigenous people who once lived on the land here, and we'll cover how they do that. Finally, the park also has an immersive living history museum called the Farm at Prophetstown. You'll get a quick overview of it this week, and the next episode we'll go in-depth about the farm because it was so fun. And if your kids love animals, between the farm and the aquatic center, you'll never get them to leave Prophetstown. The land also offers a diverse set of habitats. Much of the park is prairie grasses, which once made up 13% of Indiana. Now it's less than 1%, and many of the prairies in Indiana have been restored. On my visit, I learned that before the park began their prairie restoration, the land had primarily been used for agriculture. There were also trailer parks, housing developments, and businesses there before it became a state park and the restoration began. The process of prairie restoration happened over several decades, one piece of land at a time. To learn a little more about the types of prairies at the park, let me introduce you to Jenna Parks Freeman, the interpretive naturalist for Prophetstown. She was so gracious on our interview day. She was about to lose her voice, but rested it up beforehand and took hours from her day to give me an in-depth tour of the park. If you get a chance to do any programs led by Jenna, you better go. She's awesome.
My name's Jenna Parks Freeman, and I'm an interpretive naturalist at Prophetstown State Park. I have really felt like working at Prophetstown has helped me fall in love with the prairies. This habitat I think is so unique for our state, and it's not one that a lot of people are familiar with being a piece of Indiana. So getting to work here and see the beauty of the prairie every day has kind of spoiled me that now when I go back to forested areas of Indiana, I'm like, what's this? This isn't Indiana to me because I'm here every day, right? Prairie, in all reality, is just the French word for meadow. In North America, we typically describe prairies based on their dominant species. So what we would say is we've got a tall grass prairie here. It's dominated by a lot of tall grasses, surprise, surprise, wildflowers, and tends to be relatively flat and level. This section of Indiana, Tippecanoe County specifically, had over 1/3 of all the prairie habitat found in our state prior to European encroachment.
On my visit, she took me to a scenic overlook where trails 2 and 3 meet. This is so beautiful.
Isn't it pretty?
So what are we looking out at?
This area is the space that I like to take people. If I just have them for like 10-15 minutes in the park, I'm going to bring them here because I think this gives you a great overview of Prophetstown and its beauty. Everything that we see off the overlook deck is part of a restoration project that took place to restore our wet prairie. So we can see out here there's a lovely little creek that's kind of snaking its way through the prairie grass and flowers. And that is Harrison Creek, which runs through a significant portion of the park. It actually flows all the way out to the Wabash River. And this is a great spot for wildlife watching. So we do a program every Friday called Phenology Fridays, where we keep track of all the critters and plants and people and weather that we are experiencing at the park on that day. And we've had muskrat and beaver and river otters and snakes and turtles and frogs, all kinds of different things just from this spot right here, which is awesome.
The Wet Prairie Restoration Project happened because the Indiana Department of Transportation reached out to DNR. When INDOT work on the roadways affects sensitive habitats, the habitat needs to be replaced through a process called mitigation. INDOT knew their work on the Hoosier Heartland Highway in the area would require mitigation for the wet prairie habitat and asked if they could replace the habitat at Prophetstown. Jenna says this was a unique opportunity.
Which is really fascinating because it was one of the first times that the state park system and INDOT had worked together for a mitigation project. So the mitigation dollars that were put in here at Prophetstown helped pay for adding sinuosity to the creek, so helping it snake through the prairie rather than being a straight channel that went out to the river. It helped us take out a bunch of drainage tile that was out here for the agriculture that was here before. So now this whole area is a floodplain for the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers. The water has gotten up to the deck before.
That's so high.
I know.
What, 8 feet probably?
Yeah,
more,
maybe
10?
a little bit more, yeah. So that's natural, right?
Yeah.
That's what the river's supposed to do. And this habitat is made for that. It needs that. So taking out that drainage tile helped us return this back to a little more natural state. But it also helped us add in and seed in all these beautiful flowers. So you can see a little bit of the pink that's up by the creek here right now. That's a Joe Pye weed, which is a great native for lots of butterflies. Further out in the distance, you can kind of see some fluffy pink stuff over there. That's one of my favorites, which I have a lot of favorite flowers, but that's called Queen of the Prairie, and it kind of looks like cotton candy. Like, it's so fluffy and pink and beautiful. And then we've got lots of other things that are just starting to emerge, and that's one of the cool things about our habitats here at Prophetstown is that the species that we see change. So you come here one week, you'll see a whole group of flowers. You come here the next week, you're going to see a whole different cast of characters. This is one of my favorite spots to bring people. I just think it's a beautiful landscape.
In addition to the unique native plants, the overlook is an ideal place for bird watching. If you listen to the birding episode, you'll know this park is one of Whitney Yorger's favorite places to go birding. And if it's good enough for the Indiana Audubon, it's good enough for me.
We've got a great relationship with our local Audubon group, Sycamore Audubon Society, and they do bird watching out here at least once a month. So yeah, we've been able to see some awesome species. We do have a nesting pair of bald eagles that we often see flying through here. Lots of warblers in the woods behind us too. So yeah, it's a great spot for lots of different wildlife.
If you want to be swept away by the prairie, or do some bird watching, be sure to spend time at this overlook. Other park habitats include forested woodlands, oak savannas, rivers, and wetlands. The park's prairie fen is one of the largest in the state. A fen's a unique habitat. It's an alkaline groundwater-fed wetland. So while a bog or swamp might smell acidic, a fen does not, but still provides an environment ideal for certain wetland plants. The fen at Prophetstown is home to some rare, threatened, and endangered species of plants and animals. To sum it up, the land is a page on which the varied stories of Indiana's past are written, and those stories are written by ice, water, fire, and human hands. The first influence on the land is ice. When I visited Prophetstown, we didn't spend much time talking about ice, so very quickly, we have glaciers to thank for our state bedrock and the Wabash River. As massive glaciers melted, the Wabash River Valley was formed, and the land where Prophetstown now sits was shaped. And that easily leads us to the second formative influence on the park property, water. And yeah, we'll be talking about rivers and the Aquatic Center, which is technically something formed by human hands. But I like the idea of including the Aquatic Center in this part of the episode because it's amazing. And you'll discover how even the design of the water park reflects the nearby rivers. Jenna took me out to the Tippecanoe. The water was flowing quickly, but the surface was smooth as it flowed towards the Wabash. I felt myself relaxing as I watched the water glide past.
The Tippy, is that what you called it?
Tippy, yeah, a lot of people and local people call it the Tippy, but the Tippecanoe River is one of Indiana's, well, it is one of the nation's most biodiverse rivers. So it is biodiverse because it tends to run through areas that are slightly less developed, so it doesn't get as much pollution. It is generally pretty flat and it's pretty narrow in a lot of spots for a river. When I've kayaked the Tippy before, there are spots where, yeah, it's really very shallow, you can see in the bottom, and then there's spots where it gets really deep. So we have spots out here even where we're standing that get some pretty deep eddies. The Tippecanoe River is named after buffalo fish. So Tippecanoe is Native American. It is from the Miami word that means the place of the buffalo fish. And buffalo fish are really cool. They're one of our older fish species in the fossil record. They haven't changed very much. They're called buffalo fish because they're stinking huge. They're big.
That's a real fish then?
Yes, it's a real fish. And they still swim in the Tippecanoe River.
I thought Jenna was telling me a legend about the name at first, so it was cool to hear the buffalo fish are real. And they really are enormous. Look them up. The Tippecanoe flows into the Wabash River on the edge of the park property, which is part of the reason this land was so valuable in Indiana's history for both indigenous people and European settlers. The Wabash provided a trade route that extended all the way to New Orleans and then onto the East Coast. While the rivers aren't used the same way today, as Jenna said, biodiversity is extremely important. She explains more here.
And it's a really important river, so part of what makes it biodiverse is the freshwater mussel population. So freshwater mussels are one of the most protected species in Indiana. So our laws protect them because a lot of mussel species are federally endangered. They're really important in our waterways because mussels will actually sit in the base of our rivers. They siphon in water and they clean the water as they siphon it in. So they're pulling that water in, they're eating the particles and other contaminants in the water, and they're spitting out clean water. So they're like these amazing little ecosystem helpers that help us keep our rivers and waterways clean, but they're also really sensitive. So they're very sensitive to environmental changes, temperature changes, pollution, all those different kinds of things. They're sensitive to water levels changing as well, and they can be very heavily affected when we have droughts. And so in Indiana, it's illegal to move a mussel. That's what I like to tell people. Don't move a mussel. You're not allowed to pull them up out of the water. You have to leave them where they're sitting. Even shells and things like that we have to leave out. The shells are used by lots of different animals for calcium, but it takes mussels years to find their perfect spot in the rivers, and they'll literally move around and dig themselves a little hole and kind of anchor themselves there, and they may stay in that spot for years to come. Our native mussels can live for 80, 90, 100 years, so we want to try to preserve them as best as we can. And the Tippecanoe River is where we find the highest population of rare, threatened, and endangered mussels in the state of Indiana. So it's a very significant body of water, not only because it's beautiful and it runs through a neat part of Indiana, but also because of these super awesome creatures that live underwater that we, don't talk about as much as raccoons and squirrels because they're just not as cute, but they are just as important, if not more so.
If you're having a hard time imagining what a mussel looks like, imagine a clam or oyster. Mussels, clams, and oysters are all mollusks. They're bivalves, which means they have two shells connected by a hinge. The shells protect their soft bodies. They don't have a head, ears, or eyes. They do have inner gills and a foot they use to find their spot in the sand. I knew absolutely nothing about freshwater mussels, or really any bivalve, until talking to Jenna. And after even the tiniest amount of research, I was in. These invertebrates are insanely cool. And Jenna's not joking about how well they clean the water. An invertebrate conservation group did an experiment where they filled 2 aquariums with water. One aquarium they filled with some freshwater mussels called western pearl shell. Within 3 hours, the water went from murky to clear. There's a link to the site with the pictures in the show notes if you want to check it out. So Jenna convinced me. I won't move a mussel. The biggest issue in trying to protect mussels is that they're really bad at public relations. and the state's trying to fix that.
We have a mussel collection that we use through permissions from our non-game aquatic biologist in the state. When we were realizing, like, how do we educate people about a species that they're not allowed to touch, that they can't really see because usually it's underwater, and that, you know, we don't want people disturbing. So we've got a collection of shells, and we use those in a lot of our programs to talk about how important mussels are and to show people their beauty. You know, historically, people in Indiana especially, we used mussels to make buttons. We had button making factories in Indiana. They would literally punch the buttons right out of the shell. And so elsewhere in Indiana, especially along the Wabash, you will find these blanks that have all these buttons punched out from these huge factories that used to exist in Indiana. And they've been protected now for a long time, so we no longer can use them for food or for buttons and things like that. Not a lot of people know much about them. You know, you see them and you think, oh, it's a shell. No. It's way cooler than that. Like, this is a living being. It can think, it can feel, it can move. And it's doing this amazing garbage man job, basically, in our rivers of keeping things cleaner and providing that biodiversity. So I really love mussels. I'm very passionate about mussels.
I feel like I'm on board with them now. Like, I can see little kids being really into that because they're cleaning the water. They're the garbage man of the water. And kids love garbage trucks.
They do. It's so fascinating, right?
It seems like there is a major opportunity for someone to write a children's book about mussels or create a plush mussel. I'd just be careful not to call it a stuffed mussel, or it'll sound like food, which is what we're trying to avoid. But look, if we can make an axolotl kid-friendly, surely someone can make a mussel cool too. Water has shaped the property at Prophetstown through the rivers, and now also through the very impressive and attractive aquatic center.
Prophetstown is such a different looking state park than many of our others. It's very sunny, it's very bright. We don't have as much shade as many of our other parks if you think of Brown County and Turkey Run and places like that. The state decided to put in not just a pool, but an aquatic center. At that time, our region didn't really have anything like that. And so, we've got 2 water slides, a lazy river, a zero entry pool, and an activity pool with a basketball hoop. It has become a really popular spot, kind of to get people to come into the park. And the idea is that we hope they'll check out the rest of the park while they're here. You know, they pay our gate fee and then they pay a fee to come into the aquatic center, but they're paying the fee to enjoy the whole park, not just the aquatic center. And so when folks get here into our aquatic center area, they're also seeing native plantings. This whole area is landscaped with native species. So they're getting a little tiny exposure to the prairie, even though it's in a much more kind of manicured environment. And everything and how it's laid out also mimics our habitats, which people wouldn't necessarily know. Both of the slides are named after snake species that we see here at the park. And the lazy river actually mimics the way that the Tippecanoe River flows into the Wabash River. So again, that's a little parkitecture for you. Not something that the average person is going to pop in there and say, did you know that this was shaped this way? However, I have joked that I need a uniform swimsuit so I can sit in the lazy river and share that with people as they go through, which selfishly would be for me to stay cool. But
you could still wear the hat.
Right? Keep that dry and we'd be fine.
The concept of parkitecture is so fun, and now you will feel incredibly knowledgeable and superior when you visit and float down the lazy river, knowing it mirrors the flow of the Tippy. When you're at the aquatic center, you'll also have opportunities to see some of the animals thanks to some show and tell.
We do come out here, my staff and I come out here on Fridays. We bring an animal with us and we do a little education program when they have to get all the kids out of the pool, because that's captive audience, right? They can't go anywhere. And so we try to give them a little exposure to, hey, there's other stuff to do here at this park and other things to see. And so this has kind of been the little bait to get people in the gate. And then the idea is they drive through and they say, hey, I could go and explore this. I could take a walk after we're done with this, enjoy more of what this property has to offer.
I did think the aquatic center was cool, but honestly, I can't imagine going to play there without exploring the rest of the park. It's so beautiful and full of meandering trails and paved bike paths that weave through the prairie. It's really very captivating. Coming up next, we'll hear about the remaining 2 effects on the land, fire and human hands. You'll get to hear about prescribed fires and learn about the prophet for whom Prophetstown is named. This episode is brought to you by Indiana's own Comfort Option. As you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about the Hoosier State. It's full of hidden treasures just waiting to be unearthed, one of which is Comfort Option. They do something that no one else does: make customized, rebuildable mattresses. Make, because since 1952, the same family has been building mattresses right here in central Indiana. Custom, because you work with them to handcraft the perfect mattress for you. And rebuildable, because their mattresses are made with a one-of-a-kind modular design. Any piece can be swapped out to create a whole new construction. I've had my Comfort Option mattress for the last 7 years, and I'm happy to report I still look forward to going to sleep every night. After a day of hiking or taking on a park challenge, I love knowing I'll sleep well and wake up rested. To find your perfect mattress, visit Comfort Option online at comfortoption.com. Listeners to the podcast can get 15% off with the code INTHEPARKS. That's one word, in the parks. And hey, if you're near Fort Harrison State Park, why not stop by the Comfort Option store at the Keystone Fashion Mall and say hi? You can build your mattress in the store or online. Visit comfortoption.com. And now, back to the show. As we heard from Jenna, the land at Prophetstown is a restored prairie. Before it became a state park, a lot of work needed to go into the land to return it to its original condition. We'll hear from the park property manager, Jason Getz, about how the land was reclaimed.
My name is Jason Getz. I'm the property manager at Prophetstown State Park. I've been at Prophetstown since June of 2004. I've been doing this for a little bit while. I've been here since the park first opened. The park opened in August of 2004. And I got here in June of 2004 and was able to be part of a brand new state park from the ground up. That's not very often a manager gets a chance to do. So it's a huge attraction for me. So we have a chance to kind of erase the trace from previous land use activity to our current, restoration activities and restoration goals, which is pre-European settlement. We're trying to restore the tallgrass prairie and the oak savannas and the oak woods that once were here.
Jason's background equipped him to step in and oversee the massive amount of work that needed to be done.
I graduated from Purdue, environmental science, natural resource major, specialized in soils. When we first got here, it was restoration work, removing fence rows, old woods. We actually tore down houses that once were here to make the landscape ready for the public in a natural state park setting. Over the years, the park got busier. When I first got here, there was not a gatehouse here yet. We weren't even open to the public. And
so it really was like from ground zero.
Ground zero, yeah. And then shortly after that, I came on board to help think about all the gate collection stuff and how we're going to do business and things.
Part of the prairie restoration process is making sure the land is still treated the way it would have been before European settlers arrived. One of those elements used to develop a prairie is actually fire.
How do you guys use fire? What's the proper, is it controlled burn?
We describe Prophetstown landscape as being developed by water, ice, fire, and human hands. We know that this area was impacted by historic fires. Native Americans utilized fire for various purposes. Our landscape here with the tallgrass prairies, the wetland complexes that we have, the oak woods, oak savannas, are all fire-dependent communities. So it's a great tool in our toolbox to utilize prescribed fire for our resource management purposes. So all of our staff that participates in prescribed fire management goes through required training for the state of Indiana to be a basic wildland firefighter. And there's additional training that can take place for prescribed fire management. And there's a class that the Division of Forestry offers for prescribed fire managers. I co-teach that class.
So you're probably thinking, doesn't Smokey Bear say only you can prevent forest fires? Why are we talking about setting them? These prescribed fires are actually very important, and Jason explains why.
Prescribed fire is a fairly new resource management technique that the state of Indiana has been using, and we try to do more and more and more. Probably of all the state parks, we probably burn the most. We utilize prescribed fire here to manage our landscape, to keep the woody species from encroaching our tallgrass prairies, and a lot of our prairie species are fire-dependent plants, meaning that they need fire to survive. So they need fire to germinate their seeds. They need fire to help reduce competition from other plants. And fire-dependent plants have been designed to survive a fire environment. So we do around 500 acres of prescribed fire each year. We burn in spring, summer, and fall, and we try to not burn at one time of the year exclusively to kind of keep a natural component to the fire and have a mosaic of a community of plants. So if we burn everything in the spring, we only target certain plants that are exposed or growing during that time of the year. So we try to balance that out.
In order to have a prescribed fire, a lot of planning, flexibility, and communication is involved.
Planning fire is very dependent on the weather conditions, and some days we don't know that we're doing a prescribed burn until maybe 2 days later, and the weather has to line just right. And when we do our prescribed burns, we produce a lot of smoke, so we communicate heavily with the local community. And when I first got here, one of the first things I did was work a lot with the local news channel, the local newspapers. They came out, they did stories, and we tried to educate the public as much as we could on prescribed fire. And one reason is most people, their viewpoint of fire is what they see on TV. They see California burning down, they see all the Western fires that you see on TV now. That's their perception of fire. So when they see us utilizing fire, they make a quick connection to fire not good.
Yeah, it feels counterintuitive, like you're destroying something.
Yeah, so we try to communicate on why we do it, and this is how we do it, and where we do it, and it's safe. And if you see our smoke, don't be alarmed. So, but we do try to manage our smoke. So certainly the fire is very detailed in the weather that we need, and to produce the fire results that we need to keep everybody safe and to make sure we manage our smoke.
I find the process of prescribed fires fascinating. Prophetstown isn't the only state park to utilize the process. We'll hear later this season about how Charlestown State Park also uses prescribed fires to eliminate invasives. In fact, there may be an entire episode about the process because I find it really interesting and would love to learn more about it. The prescribed fires, while replicating natural events, are now managed by human hands, which takes us to the final element Prophetstown covers: how the land has been affected by human hands. The park focuses on two eras: Native American and European settlers in the Indiana Territory in the early 1800s, and 1920s farm life with a Sears and Roebuck farmhouse and working farm with livestock and gardens. These two eras demonstrate the way people have always felt incredibly connected to their land. We'll start with the older era. Jenna tells the story of 1800s life in Indiana before we became a state. First, she gave me an overview of woodland tribal life while we checked out the Native American village.
We're in the Native American village, which is a replica of the Prophetstown settlement.
But where are all the teepees? Aren't there supposed to be teepees out here if Native Americans lived here?
We were just talking about that, right? So what a lot of people don't realize is this settlement was here in 1808. That's when it started. Things were pretty darn modern in 1808. Native people had contact with Europeans and settlers for years prior to 1808. So in 1808, people had access to more modern tools. Metal was being used very frequently at that time. So there would have been access to more modern type structures. So what you see in our village is more of a reflection of that, kind of showing people that Prophetstown wasn't just this little ramshackle settlement. The historical notes that we have from Prophetstown indicate that it was a well-fortified city, that people lived here in great numbers, and that there were lots of different kinds of home structures. Teepees are not part of our history in Indiana. Teepees are used by many of the Great Plains Native peoples, but not utilized by the woodland tribes that were gathered here at Prophetstown. More typical structures would have been things like an A-frame and wigwam. So we would have seen some of those out here at the Prophetstown settlement as well, which unfortunately we don't have any examples of right now, but we're hoping to get some eventually. So the structures that you do see are the ones that look more modern, more like cabins, which people are always like, but they didn't have that. 1808 was pretty fresh at that time, right? So we have out in our village, there's a medicine lodge, which helps us teach about the plants of the prairie and how those were utilized by people for medications and such. We've got a chief's cabin, which shows where a person with leadership may have been housed at that time. And then we've also got a shade shelter, which at the moment isn't super shady, but would typically have branches on top of it. Because when you're out here in the prairie, believe me, in July and August, you want some shade. So that would be a space where folks would work outside of their homes. We also have the cooking hearth, where you would prepare your food with drying racks above it, and then a granary. And the granary is a food storage space. So the people who gathered here at Prophetstown, we know that they had to grow their own food. There probably were multiple granaries. Food was one of the pinch points at the time of Prophetstown. They had several hard years during that settlement, and so food was really important. Whenever you've got a group of people gathered together, right, we all know we need food to survive, and we get grumpy when we don't have it. So that is, very relatable to our times of today. We want people to recognize that 1808 wasn't really all that long ago, and the things that we need as humans are still the same.
The structures aren't original. In fact, they were made for a documentary movie, and some of them are starting to show their age. Jenna let me know they're exploring possible other locations in the park for the settlement to tell a more comprehensive story of Native American history in the area.
The idea, what we hope to do, is to be able to develop an area to teach more of the history closer to the Circle of Stones. So we are wanting to actually move a lot of these structures over into that area. And so right now we're kind of looking into the feasibility of that option before we make any major choices of replacing structures in this particular spot. We have over 10,000 years of Native history on this site, so it's not just Prophetstown. Prophetstown is one of the bigger establishments, but we have evidence that there were lots of dwellings along the rivers and in this region in general. So it's not just this little piece of, 1808 to 1811. We have 10,000 years to interpret here.
Jenna mentioned the Circle of Stones, and I'll get to that in a moment. It's a really significant place in the park. But first, let's dive more into the people who lived in Prophetstown and explain who Tenskwatawa is. He's the one who's also called the Prophet. You've probably heard of his brother Tecumseh before.
So the Prophetstown settlement, like I mentioned, it was started by Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa. Tecumseh is slightly better remembered by history as kind of this military leader and this brave figure, but Tenskwatawa is kind of faded or is seen as the loser, which is something that we don't want to perpetuate here. So at that time in 1808, many Native people from all across what we know today as the eastern half of the United States were being pushed out of their homeland. So they were being told that they needed to move to make way for European settlement, for these new individuals who were coming into the area. There were a lot of conflicts between European settlers and Native people, and just a lack of understanding between cultures, right? So a lot of times Native people were seen as different because they spoke a different language, they dressed differently, they had different religious practices. And so for those reasons, there were lots of issues between settlers and Native people. Tenskwatawa, he was a spiritual leader. So he started his life out as a young man. He had some challenges. Some historical sources say that he may have struggled with alcoholism as a young man, which alcohol is not something that Native people made to the alcoholic content that European settlers did. So alcohol was often used as a manipulation tool. You can't always make the best choices when you're using a lot of alcohol or when you have any kind of addiction. So some historical sources say that Tenskwatawa really had a hard time as a young man. But what happened is he had a vision from his God, and his God told him to give up the alcohol and to give up all these other negative things that were impacting his life and to go back to his roots, his history and his culture, and to teach other people to do the same thing. So that's what he did. He actually changed his name to Tenskwatawa, which means the open door, and he became maybe what we would equate to like a preacher. So he would go out and talk to different groups of Native people and encourage them, give up the alcohol, give up trade with these people that are coming in and taking our land and going into spaces that they shouldn't. And let's go back to our ancestors and how our ancestors used to live.
The podcast Talking Hoosier History has a couple heavily researched episodes about Tenskwatawa if you want to learn more about him. Because much of Native history was passed down orally or written by white historians, there are some details that are unclear. However, one detail that really solidified Tenskwatawa's influence as a prophet, even with some of his more radical ideas about leaving modern life behind, was when he promised to make the sun go dark. And then there was actually an eclipse. He gained a lot of followers after that. and his brother Tecumseh also took on a more defined role.
But eventually, Tecumseh took a little bit more of a role, and he kind of went out and talked to lots of groups about his brother's message. But he also talked with other Native people about gathering together to fight back and to stand up against all of this pushing and shoving where they were being told they needed to leave their homelands. Tecumseh was kind of like a recruiter in the military side of Prophetstown. So he would help train people when they got here. So in case they ever had to defend Prophetstown, they had the ability to do that.
In the midst of this is Indiana, a territory desperately wanting to become a state. Enter William Henry Harrison.
What ended up happening is, in 1811, Indiana wasn't a state yet. It was a territory trying to become a state. But we had a governor over the territory of Indiana whose name was William Henry Harrison. And William Henry Harrison's job at that time was to keep this space open for settlement.
Right.
He wanted to make sure there was plenty of space for European settlers to move out into the region so that Indiana could apply for statehood. Native people at that time weren't considered in the census numbers, so they couldn't apply and be part of the statehood request. So William Henry Harrison was very aware of Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa, and he decided to move his military in almost right next door to the Prophetstown settlement. And you can visit that site today. That's the battlefield site in Tippecanoe County.
That's kind of an aggressive move to make then.
It's definitely bold, isn't it?
Yeah. It would be hard for them to not interpret that as an offensive move against them.
Yeah, if we look at it today from kind of our own military strategies, right, which we do still have groups that do that and look back in history. It has a different context too when you consider Tecumseh, who was the military leader of Prophetstown. He wasn't even at Prophetstown when William Henry Harrison moved his troops in. Tenskwatawa, he was there, but he was like a civil leader or spiritual leader, so his role was not necessarily to go into battles, lead fights, and things like that. But then you have a military that doesn't want you there, that just comes in a stone's throw away from people that you're trying to protect. What kind of decision would we make if we were in that role?
It is really hard for me to simply listen to historic events without wanting to defend, understand, or analyze motives from either group. And if you find yourself living in that same tension, stick with me and listen a little more.
What we do know what happened is Tenskwatawa encouraged warriors to engage with Harrison's men, which they did in November of 1811, and that is what today we know as the Battle of Tippecanoe. History records for us how many of William Henry Harrison's soldiers died during that battle, but we don't know how many Native people died during that fight. We do know that a lot of the warriors ended up losing faith in Tenskwatawa, and they retreated from the battle and retreated from Prophetstown. The next day after the battle took place, Prophetstown was burned to the ground by William Henry Harrison and his men, because that meant that there was no mark of home left for people to come back to. We do know that Tenskwatawa tried to reestablish Prophetstown at a later date and to bring people back together, but he was never able to gather people in quite the numbers.
Harrison and other government officials were also terrified the natives were going to align with the British to fight back against the fledgling United States. The year after this, the U.S. and England were involved in the War of 1812, so there were many layers of motives and fears at play. Tecumseh did actually join the British during that war and was killed in battle in 1813. Tenskwatawa and the others moved to Canada until 1825, when he and a group of Shawnee moved back to Kansas until his death in 1836. Okay, so there's the Indiana history you didn't know you needed. Why does this ancient history even matter? Well, Jenna has a great answer for you.
I do think the best thing that we can do today as people who are non-Indigenous is to know the history of the space that we live in and to recognize who lived here before us and how they shaped the land before we ever got here.
She took me to the Circle of Stones we heard about earlier and explained why it's there and why it matters.
We're at the Circle of Stones, and on each of the rocks there's a plaque, and each plaque and rock represents one of the Native American tribes that gathered at the Prophetstown settlement. So there were at least 14 tribes that gathered together at Prophetstown to stand up for their culture and their way of life. This spot is a place in the park where we wanted to make sure that history is evident. It's the name of the park, it's our namesake, and so many people haven't heard the story of Prophetstown or maybe not familiar with it. This is local. This is important for us to know as Hoosiers and as visitors in the state of Indiana. So this space is supposed to be a spot that is permanent, will permanently represent those individuals who gathered here to stand up for their culture and their way of life.
Not only are we recognizing those who formed Indiana in the past, Jenna also stated the obvious. Native Americans are still in Indiana today, and everyone's story deserves to be heard.
Here at this park, we want to consciously be in good relation with those Native groups that have history here, because this is their story. Whether it's a painful story or a hopeful story, it's one that should be told.
The Circle of Stones is a tangible way to recognize the people who lived here generations ago and whose descendants still live here now. The park has taken on the weight of telling the Native story as responsibly as they can.
I find it to be a really solemn spot, very sacred spot. It feels very impactful when you walk into this area. Native partnership is really important to us. One of our intentions is to be in good relation with the tribes that have history here. Indiana historically has not done the best job of that. And so at Prophetstown State Park, we really do want to set a different precedent. With the formation of the Circle of Stones, the state and the folks who are working on this at the time were able to partner with a lot of those tribes. During the dedication, tribes were invited to come out for that as well and to speak. So we did have representatives from the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, for example, who spoke at that event, and others. And we also have letters from many of those tribes in support of this particular designation as the Circle of Stones. Our intention is to continue working in partnership with those tribes and with those groups to make sure that we're getting their feedback and input when we are looking to change things at the park or to move forward with how we're teaching the history. We want the tribes to be involved with that. You know, I'm not a Native person. I don't have Native heritage in my family that I know of, but I'm entrusted with telling the story here at Prophetstown State Park. Even though it's not my personal story, we want to make sure that we're doing a good job with that.
Are you still feeling that tension? The need to have good guys and bad guys, to cast the heroes and villains? But maybe we don't need to make everyone fit into an archetype. We can simply hear the story, acknowledge that people have always been willing to fight for what they believe in, and recognize that our identity is often connected to the land. Whether it's a place we've lived in for generations, or a new land we're desperate to turn into a home.
You've got to have passion and belief behind that, which is part of what we try to educate about here at Prophetstown. Standing up for things that you believe in is important. And so sharing that piece of history, whether or not we believe today it was the right or wrong thing to do, it's still important for us to recognize this space is significant and important to people, and that we all, every human, shares the similarity in homeland and knowing where we come from and having that connection to a space. So we really try to hit that home with what we teach here today.
In 1816, Indiana did become a state with a population of around 65,000. 100 years later, the state had closer to 3 million living in it. Instead of native settlements, the land was filled with family farms who changed the land as well. The farm at Prophetstown captures a decade before the Great Depression, and even though Indiana is another 100 years down the road today, there's something about the red barn, towering windmill, and farmhouse that feels iconic, like you're looking at a postcard.
We have a unique partnership with the farm at Prophetstown. They're a valuable partner of ours, and we love having the farm here in the park. It really, they interpret the 1920s farming history of the Wabash River Valley. It comes really close to aligning with us developing the landscape that was once here, the prairie landscape. So they're the farming part, we show the prairie part that once was here.
The partnership between farm and prairie makes Prophetstown an incredibly engaging state park. The farm is so fun, kid and adult friendly, and full of amazing activities and events all year long. In 2 weeks, you'll hear from their director, who took me on a thorough tour of all things farm. You won't want to miss learning about the chickens, barn dances, and farm-to-table dinners. To recap, we've learned how Prophetstown was shaped by ice, the glaciers, water, the tipi and aquatic center, fire, prescribed burns, and human hands, the native people groups and farm life in the 1920s. Even now, the state park is still being shaped by human hands, and thankfully, the generations of wisdom and lessons we've picked up from history will help the staff shape the land responsibly and for our enjoyment. One of the biggest enjoyments people have at Prophetstown is the campground, which has 55 full hookup and 55 electric sites, with future plans to double the campground. My family wasn't a camping family, but for many years, we came up around Thanksgiving to Battleground to visit my grandparents who lived there at the time. Before leaving Indy, my parents took out the back seat of our Astro minivan, and after our grandparent time was over, we drove to a local Christmas tree farm in Battleground and cut down our tree for the year. As a preteen, this was of course like the worst, longest experience of my life. In my mind, it was always too cold, too windy, too snowy, and we walked for miles to find a tree that met everyone's approval, which was probably the first one we passed. The cool part was that we'd load it into the van, and my brother and I would sit on the van floor next to the tree for the drive back home. Hey, it was the 90s, don't judge. Why the trip down memory lane? Well, just wait until you hear where Prophetstown State Park put their campground when the park was developed in 2004.
So a portion of the campground at Prophetstown State Park prior to becoming part of the state park was a Christmas tree farm. So there's lots of pine and spruce and fir trees that you'll see kind of interspersed in a section of the campground.
How crazy is that? The same Christmas tree farm I came to as a kid with my family is where Prophetstown is today. I loved making that personal connection to the park.
So on the portion that was still pretty dense with Christmas trees, we have let most of those trees grow up, but they don't have a very long lifespan. I like to tell people, Christmas tree farms are not a native habitat in Indiana. Most of our pines and spruces aren't native to our state, but have been brought in from other habitats. So these trees are now ending their lifespan and needing to be replaced. So as we are, removing trees in the campground, they're getting replaced with oaks and hickories and redbuds and dogwoods and other species that are more natural to our specific habitat here at Prophetstown.
The campground has two loops, Spruce Loop with 55 full hookup sites and Savannah Loop with 55 electric sites. Jenna drove me through the campground and shared about the area as well as her favorite place to camp there.
The Savannah Loop is my personal favorite place to camp. When I have the opportunity to camp here at Prophetstown State Park, I always camp on one of these sites. I really like them, especially in the summer as you look out to the prairie grasses. It is like a fireworks show with the lightning bugs out here. It's breathtaking. So I love being able to camp right on that edge and getting that experience out here in the Savannah Loop that you can't quite get in the Spruce Loop.
I found myself wishing I had grown up camping because the loops were so tidy, pretty, and still offered privacy from other campers.
My family did not grow up camping.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
But driving through here, I'm really wishing that we would have this look so fun.
Yeah.
I would have hated it as a teenager because I
Yes.
hated everything.
Sure. Well, we all.
But
right?
like now as an adult or like if there were little kids, like this could be some really fun memories and seeing that like there's some people with huge campers, but there's also people just pitching tents. But this is really, really neat.
If you've never been camping before, Prophetstown seems like a great place to try it out. I also want to highlight another important way human hands have influenced the park, and that is through accessibility. Since Prophetstown is a newer park, its development can thoughtfully consider ways to be more accessible and ADA compliant. Older parks with buildings and shelters from the 1950s may not have the flexibility that Prophetstown does.
Because this is so new, to be able to make things more accessible for people who maybe strollers or wheelchairs or things like that too, I think that's a great opportunity that you guys have to keep people pulling into the park and be able to use it well. It's neat.
Yeah, you make a good point because with the new ways of thinking and new needs for recreational purposes, being a state park, we have the opportunity to provide those areas for ADA accessibility and trails for people that have different requirements to enjoy the natural setting. So,
some of the ways the park provides accessibility are at the campground. All sites are wheelchair accessible. The circle of stones and scenic overlook Jenna took me to are all paved. There's also a paved bike trail through the entire park that provides an immersive prairie experience. The master plan sketches out the park's future, so there will be even more opportunities to provide accessibility. Here's Jason with what you have to look forward to for all of the park's development.
So our goal really is to, when people come into the park, once you cross that bridge, we want people to see somewhere old, somewhere new, and they can see a big difference in the landscape. Oh, we're definitely in the state park now is our goal. We have a gravel quarry operation that you have seen coming in that's creating a lake for us. They have about 5 years left, today's date, on mining. So I say it that way because things change and there's new opportunities that become available that extends their mining time. But their goal is to make us a lake, make us a recreational opportunity for people to have canoes, kayaks, boats, paddleboards, fishing piers, boardwalks, a whole new development. So Prophetstown is about kind of halfway developed.
Well, that's what makes it kind of exciting, though. I feel like this is already a gorgeous property. When we were driving in, we were like, this is amazing. But to think that 5 years from now and 10 years from now, it's going to keep being dynamic, I think that's really cool because it's already stunning. And to think that there's going to be even more opportunities for people to connect with the land and the history, that's really cool. Probably
the best part about being part of a new state park is we have the opportunity to think along those lines, and we can match the resource, why the people first settled this area, what attracted the European settlers, what attracted Tecumseh and the Prophet when they were here, what they saw, and we can create that landscape, overlay it with the state park facilities to let the people of the state of Indiana and other states come and enjoy.
This is the part of the podcast where I typically introduce you to someone from the park's Friends volunteer group and encourage you to be part of making the park enjoyable. However, Prophetstown doesn't have a Friends group yet. If you'd like to volunteer at the park or be part of developing an official Friends group, reach out to Jenna. She'll get you involved with one of their main events, like their plant sale, or connect you with other volunteers. Maybe you can be part of launching a Friends group for Prophetstown. If I lived closer, I know I'd get involved. I love this park, and it was very easy to get excited about its future.
We have a lot to offer, and the park's still growing. The neat thing is a person could come today, they come a few years later and see differences, see changes. They'll see changes in the landscape, they'll see changes in the facilities, which is kind of neat.
We talk about human hands change this landscape, along with fire and ice and native peoples, and we're still changing it today, but kind of trying to get it back to what we think it might have looked like. It's really beautiful to think about the history in this area. There's some quotes from early surveyors who came through Tippecanoe County who said that the prairie grasses are so tall that when you're on horseback you could tie them in a knot above your head, which is like such a wild thing to even like picture in your head. But we do programs here where we do guided bike rides and such, and so sometimes when we're on the bikes I'll have everybody stop and say, hey, what if you were on a horse? Can you imagine the grass being, just as tall as it is today? But also there's bison and other animals that we no longer have. That would be a very different experience from what we see today.
If you're ready to go back in time to see Indiana in its prairie form, Prophetstown is the place to be. I'm ready to go again. I want to see the farm decked out for Christmas, watch birds migrate through in the spring, see the summer wildflowers in bloom, and listen to the Tippy flowing until it joins the Wabash River. Let's spend some time walking the land that is our home state, consider how it was created, and how we can be part of shaping Indiana's future. A huge thanks goes to the Prophetstown staff and volunteers who shared their time and knowledge with me. Thank you, Jenna Parks Freeman and Jason Getz. In the Parks is not officially associated with Indiana DNR, but as always, I'm so grateful for all the incredible work they do for our parks. Please share this podcast with your friends and give it a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. You can follow along on Instagram and Facebook at In the Parks Online for more state parks content and my recommendations for the best places to get ice cream near each park. After visiting Prophetstown, I stopped by the Igloo Frozen Custard, and it was delicious. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you in the parks.